The attorney's voice dropped mid-sentence. He'd been so confident just 30 seconds earlier. Standing at that podium in his pressed suit, rattling off numbers, reading from his legal pad like he was delivering a sermon. And then the judge, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses pushed down to the tip of her nose, set down her pen and said, very quietly, "Counsel, do you actually know what your client's husband did for 31 years?" The room went still. My wife turned to look at me, and for the first time in a very long time, I watched the color drain from her face. I didn't say a word. I just sat there with my hands folded on the table, the way I'd sat through hundreds of rooms like that one, in buildings far less comfortable than a county courthouse in Ohio. Let me back up. My name is Norman. I'm 63 years old. I spent my career with the federal government, specifically with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, which most people don't know exists until they end up across the table from one of us. For 3 decades, I tracked financial fraud, hidden assets, shell accounts. Money moved through layers of transactions designed to make it disappear. I know how people hide things, and more importantly, I know how to find them. My wife. I'll call her my wife because that's what she still legally was on the day she stood in that courtroom and called me a burden. Her name is Sylvia. We met in 1987 at a church potluck in Columbus. She brought a green bean casserole. I brought nothing because I'd been working a case for 11 days straight and forgot it was Sunday. She laughed at that. I thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. We got married 9 months later. For most of those years, things were fine. Not perfect, nothing is, but fine. We raised 2 kids, paid off the house. I retired at 58 with a federal pension and benefits. I thought we'd done everything right. What I didn't realize was that Sylvia had been keeping a separate set of books. It started, I think, around 2019. My mother had a stroke. She was 81, living alone in the house she and my father had owned since 1972. A 3-bedroom colonial in Westerville with a vegetable garden in the back and a ceramic rooster on the kitchen counter that she'd had since before I was born. After the stroke, Mom couldn't live alone anymore. We talked about options. A facility would cost anywhere from $4,000 to $7,000 a month. Mom had savings. She and my father had been careful people, Depression-era mindset, cash in the bank, no debt. But even careful savings don't last long at those rates. Sylvia suggested Mom move in with us. I was grateful, genuinely. Our house had a finished basement we weren't using, and I thought it was a generous offer. We converted the space, added a bathroom, put in a chairlift on the stairs. My mother cried when she saw it. She said she didn't want to be a bother. I told her she wasn't. What I didn't know was that Sylvia had already had a separate conversation with my mother. A long one, apparently, at the kitchen table while I was picking up Mom's prescriptions, about finances, about what it would cost to care for her properly, about how the right thing to do would be to name Sylvia as co-signer on her accounts. Just for convenience, Sylvia said. Just so bills could be paid without bothering me. My mother trusted her. My mother trusted her. My mother trusted everyone. I noticed things slowly. A prescription that should have been refilled wasn't. A doctor's appointment that got rescheduled 3 times. Small things. The kind of things that, taken individually, mean nothing together. They started to form a shape I recognized from years of looking at documents other people assumed no one would bother to read. My mother's health declined. That was real. The stroke had done genuine damage, and she had good days and bad days. On bad days, she got confused. She would ask me about my father, who had been gone for 6 years. She'd forget what month it was. On good days, she'd sit in the garden and deadhead her marigolds and tell me stories about growing up in rural Indiana that I'd heard 100 times and never got tired of. I started sitting with her more, just being present. Sylvia didn't like that. You hover, she told me one evening. Your mother doesn't need you watching her every minute. You make her anxious. I didn't argue. I've never been a man who argues easily. It's not a virtue. I've had therapists tell me that. It's just how I'm wired. I process, I observe, I wait. But I started paying closer attention to other things. I asked my mother, gently, about her accounts. She got flustered, said Sylvia handled all that now, said it was easier that way. I asked if I could take a look sometime, just to make sure everything was in order. Mom said she'd ask Sylvia. She never brought it up again. I don't know if she forgot or if something happened to the conversation. By the fall of 2021, I had enough to know something was wrong. I didn't know the full picture yet. I just knew the outline. I reached out to a former colleague, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on a bank fraud case back in 2009. We met for lunch. I brought what I had. She spent 2 weeks going through it. When she called me back, her voice was careful, professional. That careful, professional tone is its own kind of message, and I'd heard it enough times to know what it meant before she said a word. Sylvia had moved approximately $64,000 out of my mother's accounts over 18 months. It was done slowly and methodically, small transfers, payments to vendors that didn't exist, a home care agency that never sent anyone, my mother's money, disappearing into accounts I hadn't known Sylvia had. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Panera Bread for 20 minutes after that call. Then I drove home, made dinner, and didn't say a word. People ask me why I didn't confront her immediately. I understand the question. I've asked it myself. Part of it was professional habit. You don't show your hand before you have everything in order. Part of it was something harder to name. 34 years of marriage, 2 children. Holidays and arguments in hospital waiting rooms, and a trip to Portugal we took for our 25th anniversary where it rained every single day and we didn't care. You don't walk into a room and blow up 34 years of your life on the first day you have evidence. And part of it, the part I'm least comfortable admitting, was that I still wanted to be wrong. I wasn't wrong. I spent the next several months documenting everything. I was quiet about it, methodical. I talked to my mother's primary care physician and got copies of records I was entitled to as her son. I pulled property documents. I cross-referenced dates. My former colleague helped me build a timeline that was, as she put it, airtight. During that time, I also quietly contacted an elder law attorney in Columbus. She helped me understand what needed to happen and in what order. My mother needed to be moved off those joint accounts. Sylvia needed to be removed as any kind of authorized party. And all of it needed to happen before Sylvia realized what was happening. We did it on a Tuesday in March. I took my mother to her doctor's appointment, then we stopped at the bank on the way home. Mom was clear-headed that day, which I was grateful for. She signed what she needed to sign. The bank manager, a young woman who was professionally calm and asked no unnecessary questions, processed everything. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Sylvia had no access to my mother's accounts. By 4:15, I was home making my mother a cup of tea. Sylvia noticed within 2 days. She didn't say anything directly. That wasn't her style. She got quiet, watchful. She started asking my mother small questions about her doctor's appointment, about whether she'd been to the bank recently, about whether she'd talked to anyone. My mother is not a deceptive person, she answered honestly. Sylvia came to me that Thursday evening while I was reading in the living room. Your mother says you took her to the bank. I did. She had some things she needed to take care of. What kind of things? Her accounts. She wanted to simplify. A long pause. Why didn't you tell me? It was her business to handle. She looked at me for a while. I kept reading. I've been managing her finances for 2 years, she said. It would have been polite to give me some notice. You're right, I said. I should have mentioned it sooner. She waited for more. I didn't offer any. She went upstairs. I heard her in the bedroom on the phone, speaking quietly. I don't know who she called. The divorce filing came in June. I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was the substance of it. Specifically, what Sylvia's attorney had decided to argue. Sylvia claimed that I had been financially controlling throughout our marriage, that I had isolated her from meaningful financial participation, that I had manipulated my elderly mother into cutting off access to accounts that Sylvia had been legitimately managing. She was seeking a substantial portion of our marital assets on the grounds of what her attorney called economic abuse, a term that has real legal meaning and real legal protection for actual victims, and which was being applied here, in my considered opinion, in remarkable bad faith. She was also seeking to have my federal pension classified as a marital asset subject to division. I sat in my attorney's office and read through the filing twice. She's inverting everything, I said. My attorney, a woman in her early 50s who had been doing family law in central Ohio for 20 years, nodded. That's the strategy. It puts you on defense. What do you recommend? Same thing I tell everyone, she said. Let me do the talking. You do the listening, and don't react. I told her that would not be a problem. The hearing was set for October. In the months between, Sylvia's attorney sent discovery requests. Standard procedure, we responded to everything. Slowly, carefully, completely. My attorney is thorough. What we sent back was accurate and devastating. Though you wouldn't know it from the tone of the documents, everything we provided looked routine. Our response included, among other things, a financial forensic report prepared by my former colleague, a timeline, bank records, documentation of 22 transactions that could not be explained by any legitimate purpose, a statement from the branch manager at my mother's bank who had noted certain irregularities in the account activity and documented them internally at the time. We also included my service records from the IRS, 31 years, the unit I worked in, my case history, partially redacted for ongoing investigations, the commendations, the letters. My attorney submitted all of it as exhibits. Sylvia's attorney did not appear to have read everything carefully before the hearing. I arrived at the courthouse early. October in Ohio has a particular quality. That dry, still cold that settles in before the first real frost, where the sky is bright and the air smells like leaves turning. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, drank coffee from a travel mug my daughter had given me for Father's Day 5 years ago. It said, "World's okayest dad" on it, which I've always found more endearing than the sincere versions. My daughter, Claire, knew what was happening. I had told her in September, sat her down, walked her through everything methodically, showed her the documentation. She had cried. She was angry, not at me. She had called her mother that same evening, and the call had lasted 40 minutes, and apparently had not gone well. My son, Barrett, was another matter. Barrett and Sylvia have always been close in a way that sometimes felt pointed. He lives in Denver. He'd heard his mother's version first and heard it many times before I ever got a word in. I had sent him the same documentation. He'd sent back a text that said he needed more time to process it. I understood. I didn't like it, but I understood. I finished my coffee, went inside. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. These domestic hearings usually are. Not the dramatic, high-ceilinged rooms you see on television, but a practical wood-paneled room with fluorescent lighting and folding tables for the attorneys. The judge was already on the bench when I came in. She was reviewing documents. She didn't look up. Sylvia was already seated with her attorney. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and had her hair done. She looked put together. She looked like someone who had prepared for this. She didn't look at me when I came in. I sat down. My attorney leaned over and said quietly, "How are you?" "Ready," I said. She nodded. "Remember, you don't speak unless the judge addresses you directly." I had no intention of speaking. The opening arguments were what I'd expected. Sylvia's attorney went first. He was a smooth talker, the kind of attorney who performs confidence, the way some people perform wealth, a little too visibly. He talked about the marriage, about Sylvia's contributions, about my controlling nature, about the accounts. He described me as a man who had systematically excluded his wife from financial decision-making while presenting a facade of cooperation. I sat with my hands folded and my face arranged into nothing particular. Then he said it. My client's husband, in 31 years of federal employment, failed to develop any meaningful financial acumen outside of a bureaucratic context. He is, by his own family's account, a man who deferred everything, including the management of his own mother's affairs, until those failures became impossible to ignore. At that point, rather than address those failures honestly, he chose to manipulate a vulnerable elderly woman into revoking access to accounts she had voluntarily authorized. He paused for effect. He is, in the simplest terms, a man who has spent his life letting others carry the weight and is now attempting to punish his wife for having done so. I heard a small sound from the row behind me. My daughter. I didn't turn around. The judge made a note. Then she looked up at Sylvia's attorney over her glasses. "Counsel," she said, "I've had a chance to review the exhibits submitted by the respondent's counsel. Before we continue, I want to make sure I'm understanding something correctly." He smiled agreeably. "Of course, Your Honor. You've characterized She glanced at her papers. You've characterized this man as someone who lacked financial expertise and deferred to others throughout his career. That's correct. The judge picked up one of the exhibit folders. Are you familiar with IRS criminal investigation? A beat. In general terms, Your Honor. This exhibit shows that your client's husband spent 31 years as a special agent and senior investigator with that division. He led a financial crimes unit for 11 of those years. He was the lead investigator on a case involving over $40 million in concealed assets. She set the folder down. Counsel, do you actually know what your client's husband did for a living? The attorney opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his notes. Then at Sylvia. I heard Sylvia say something under her breath. I couldn't make out the words. You see, the attorney started. Your Honor, the characterization was based on. It was based on a significant misunderstanding of who is sitting at that table, the judge said evenly, which means that some of the arguments in this filing need to be revisited. She set her pen down. Looked at Sylvia directly. Ma'am, I want you to understand something. The court takes financial abuse allegations very seriously, in both directions. The hearing lasted most of the day. By the end of it, the financial forensic report had been entered into evidence and accepted. The documentation of the $64,000 was on the record. Sylvia's attorney had attempted at several points to reframe things, to argue intent, to argue ambiguity, and each time the judge had asked a precise, specific question that made the argument collapse. At one point, the attorney tried to suggest that the transfers to non-existent vendors could have been a bookkeeping error. The judge asked him to specify which of the 22 transactions he believed was an error and explain the mechanism. He could not. At another point, Sylvia herself was asked to describe in detail what services the home care agency had provided. She said she couldn't remember the name of the agency. She said records may have been lost. She said she had been acting in good faith and was simply trying to help. The judge wrote something down and did not respond. The formal ruling came 3 weeks later. I won't go through every line of it. My attorney keeps a copy if anyone wants to read dense legal language for recreation, but the substance was this. The claim of economic abuse against me was dismissed. The financial forensic report was accepted as credible evidence of misappropriation. Sylvia was ordered to repay my mother's estate $64,000, plus interest, plus legal fees. The matter was also referred to the county prosecutor's office for review, which I had not requested, but did not object to. The division of marital assets was not what Sylvia's attorney had asked for. My pension remained mine. The house, which is in my name and was purchased with money I had saved before we married, remained mine. Sylvia received what Ohio law requires in equitable distribution for a marriage of our length, which is meaningful but considerably less than what had been requested. Her attorney filed a notice of appeal. It was withdrawn 4 months later. I told my son about the ruling over the phone. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Dad, I want to apologize. You don't have to. I do. I should have called you sooner. I should have asked more questions instead of I should have talked to you. Barrett, I said, you're not the one who needs to apologize. Another long pause. How's Grandma? She's good today. She planted daffodil bulbs this morning. Told me the same story about the county fair in 1961 3 times. He laughed. It was a small, tired laugh. Tell her I'll call her Sunday. She'll like that. My mother doesn't fully understand what happened. I've explained parts of it. She gets upset when I explain too much. So I've learned to give her the outline and let her fill in the rest with what she can hold. She knows that the financial situation is sorted out. She knows her money is protected. She knows I handled it. She told me one morning while she was drinking her coffee and watching the birds at the feeder she's had in every house she's ever lived in, a ceramic one shaped like a barn, chipping at the edges. She told me she never worried about me. Not once, not in 63 years. You were always the quiet one, she said. But quiet doesn't mean absent. I didn't say anything. Your father was the same, she said. Nobody ever knew how much he was paying attention. I looked out at the yard. The daffodil bulbs were already in the ground, waiting for spring. I know, Mom, I said. The divorce was finalized in February. I'm not going to tell you I feel good about it. I don't. 34 years is a long time. You don't walk out of that feeling like you won something. You walk out feeling like you survived something, which is different. Claire came for the weekend after the paperwork was signed. She brought her dog, a large, opinionated golden retriever named Springsteen, who immediately occupied my entire couch and showed no remorse about it. We ordered pizza. We watched old movies. She didn't ask me how I was feeling, which was exactly right, because I would not have known what to say. On Sunday morning, she was packing up to drive back to Cincinnati, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. You knew the whole time, didn't you, what she was doing?" "Eventually," I said. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I thought about how to answer that. There are several true answers. The one I gave her was the truest one, because I needed it to be undeniable, I said. Not just to the court, to everyone. She nodded slowly. "Was it?" "I think so." She hugged me. Springsteen tried to insert himself between us and nearly knocked over the coffee maker. She drove away at 10:30. I stood on the front porch for a while. The February air was sharp and clean. Down the street, a neighbor was scraping ice off his windshield. The sound carried in that particular way it does in winter, when everything else is quiet. I went inside, made a second cup of coffee, sat with my mother while she worked on a crossword puzzle she'd been doing for 3 days. She asked me what a 7-letter word for persistence was. I thought about it for a moment. "Resolve," I said. She counted the squares, filled it in, and smiled. I think about that crossword puzzle a lot. My mother sitting there at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, asking me what a 7-letter word for persistence was. She didn't know she was describing the last 4 years of my life. She just needed a word that fit. What happened to me, to us, didn't come from nowhere. Sylvia didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone who stole from a sick old woman. That's not how it works. It happens in degrees, a small justification here, a quiet rationalization there, a slow convincing of herself that she deserved it, that she'd earned it, that no one would notice. And the reason she believed no one would notice is because I had spent 31 years not drawing attention to what I knew. She mistook my silence for ignorance. A lot of people do. I've thought about what made the difference in that courtroom. It wasn't the luck. It wasn't the judge being in a good mood. It was the work. The months of careful documentation, the forensic report, the bank records, every transaction accounted for and placed in sequence. That's what I mean when I say I needed it to be undeniable, not just to win. But because the truth, when you're dealing with someone who is skilled at reframing things, has to be so thoroughly documented that there is no room left for a counter-narrative. I learned that from 31 years of doing this professionally. The facts don't speak for themselves. You have to arrange them so they cannot be misread. That's the part people skip when they want a simple story. They want the twist in the courtroom, the attorney freezing up, the wife's face going pale. And yes, that moment was real, and I won't pretend it didn't carry a certain weight. But what made that moment possible was every quiet Tuesday before it, every file I pulled, every phone call I made without telling anyone I was making it. Every morning I sat across from Sylvia at breakfast and behaved normally while carrying the full weight of what I knew. That kind of discipline isn't natural. It's built. I built it over decades, case by case, learning to hold information without letting it distort my behavior. To be patient, not because I was passive, but because I understood that acting too early would cost me everything. My son called me 3 weeks after the ruling. We talked for a long time. He said he was sorry he hadn't trusted me. I told him I understood why he'd hesitated. He'd gotten a story first, and stories that arrive first tend to lodge deep. What I didn't tell him, because it would have sounded like a lecture, was that I'd learned something from watching him struggle with it. The willingness to sit with uncertainty long enough to ask harder questions. That's not a skill most people develop until something forces them to. Barrett's working on it. I can hear it in how he talks now. My mother asked me last week if the business with Sylvia was all settled. I told her it was. She nodded and went back to her birds. She's right not to dwell. The daffodils she planted are up now. Yellow and white, in 2 straight rows along the fence, exactly where she put them. She doesn't remember planting them. She just sees them every morning and smiles. Some things you do for outcomes you won't be around to see clearly. You do them anyway because they're right, because the record matters, because the truth has to be somewhere even when no one's looking at it yet. That's enough. It always has been.